What's up, everyone? It's Sharnice here, and today I am going to spill tea about Term 2 at St. George's University. And we should just start right now because it gets really crazy. So guys, I just finished my first year of medical school. Specifically, I just finished Term 2. And I just wanted to talk to you guys about what to expect for Term 2 for those of you who are in Term 1 right now. And just talk about the mistakes that I made and kind of give tips about how you can be successful in Term 2. So the way I'm going to structure this, I'm just going to go module by module, and I'll kind of talk about what each one entails, and then I'll talk about my personal experience, and then I'll give you guys some tips. So let's do it. All right, so the first module of Term 2 is the ER module, the endocrine and reproductive module. So, for some reason, I just was not prepared for ER. Like, mentally, I just didn't understand. I don't think I really, thought about everything that we had to do because, ER, the exam itself is one of the more straightforward ones, but I think that ER, is a beast of a module because you have to, you're learning, all about different hormones. You're learning about the different pathways, different hormones that turn off other hormones, that turn on other hormones, how exactly things are synthesized, where they're synthesized. We're learning about all the reproductive organs. And that is where I went left. So anatomy for me, I kind of talked a little bit about the MSK module in my Term 1 video, but I wasn't ready for anatomy. I just didn't understand how I was going to digest it all and learn it, understand it. So it was really hard for me, and that was a weakness for me in Term 2. Well, not in the whole term because I got myself together, but in ER. So yeah, there's a lot of pelvis and perineum anatomy. There's a lot of reproductive organs anatomy, just anything you can think of that involves even a lot of pituitary gland anatomy, obviously, because we're talking about all these hormones that are made or stored and come from there. So that was a lot in itself. The exam, like I said, was a pretty straightforward exam. I didn't do as well as I wanted to because I don't know. Anatomy, I really tanked anatomy. It's, I think where I go wrong with anatomy is I'm sometimes unable to orient myself when I'm looking at the cadavers. But as Term 2 went on and anatomy was I'm not going anywhere, I decided that I was gonna take a handle on anatomy and reframe how I was approaching it. So I'll talk about that a little more. But my tips for you for endocrine and reproductive. So the first tip is you absolutely have to get your anatomy down. If you have to make flashcards on Quizlet or Anki, or I started making anatomy flashcards on Google Slides. If you have to do that, do it. And for SGU, I recommend don't try your best not to go outside and try your best not to go to outside sources and find other images, because they're going to test you on exactly what they show you either in lecture or small group or lab. So use those images to create your flashcards and study your anatomy every day. Just do it. Listen to me. My second tip is to make sure that you are whiteboarding your pathways all the time. They're very important. You have to know every step. You need to know how cortisol is made. You need to know how testosterone is made. You need to know all those things. You need to know where things are coming from. What are the pathways? They're very important and very high yield, and they'll test you on them. So I would whiteboard those every day. Whether, you know, whiteboard on an actual whiteboard, or you can like scribble in your Notability, scribble on paper, get a new one, scribble it. But definitely the pathways and your anatomy are the most important things in the ER module. But also say, this goes along kind of with your whiteboarding, but you need to know everything about these hormones. You need to know what kind of second messenger pathway they're doing, each one is doing. First aid has a couple of mnemonics for those. You need to know what is stimulating what shuts off what. You need to know what the function is. So if you can get yourself acquainted with those as you learn each hormone, as you learn about each thing, maybe you can make a chart. I will try to link a picture here if I have one, but a chart that basically is just like, what is this hormone, what does it do, what does it shut off, what does it turn on, how is it made, and you know, any notes that you may have. So that's ER. I think ER is one of those modules that you can do really well in. You just have to stay focused and not be intimidated by like the anatomy. All right, so DM was actually one of my favorite modules. So DM is digestion and metabolism. So it's exactly what it sounds like. We talked about the whole digestive tract. That includes anatomy. There was a lot of anatomy, histology, and we did metabolism, and that was a lot of biochemistry. So we did a lot of different pathways again, glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, the electron transport chain, fatty acid oxidation, ketone, like we did it all. And I personally like that stuff. I'm more of a biochem person. I think I like the process of things more than I do like anatomy. So yeah, for DM, I really focused on my anatomy because I was like, anatomy's not gonna get me ever again. So I made sure that I made, again, my flashcards for my anatomy. I did those on Google Slides. I just took the images that they would show us, and I would, in Notability, I would white them out with like the white pencil feature, and then on the next slide, I would have the full image fully identified. So that's how I really excelled in my anatomy for DM. And then for histology, I kind of did the same thing. I made the slides as I was going, and that's how I really mastered the histology as well. As for all of those pathways, it just kind of like makes sense to me, but I think the things that you really need to focus on and that can kind of like trip people up in the DM module and those metabolic pathways is like knowing what enzymes and what cofactors are activating or inhibiting a pathway. But like once you get the big concept of that, like insulin is when you're fed, glucagon is when you're not fed, like it kind of just like makes sense for every single pathway. I don't know how to explain it, but that is the most important piece. So yeah, I think in DM we had a lab as well. So the lab was really helpful because we had cadaver images, and they also test you on that at the end of the term when you have your lab exam. So for the lab, what I would recommend is they give you like lab activities, and they also give you like another lab sheet. SGU also provides like lab quizzes on Sakai. So what I would do is make sure that you organize your lab activities for all the labs and stuff. There was also a lab in ER, I believe. But every lab activity that you get, and also those practice quizzes on Sakai, I would save those in like one little folder that's just called lab, because you know, by the time you get through ER and DM and 3 NB modules, then like by the time you're ready to study for lab, you're just kind of like, oh my gosh, what was that again? So yeah, just prepare yourself, make sure that you're saving things as you go, and organizing yourself as you go, because organization is key. My big tips for DM would be, one, again, to get the anatomy down, whether that's through flashcards or it's through some people like to use the app Complete Anatomy, or it's through Google Slides, or any way you can. Make sure you get the anatomy down because it is heavily tested, and you need to know structure and function of things, right? Like that's what medical school is all about. So that's the first thing, get your anatomy down. The second thing would be to know your diseases and your syndromes. Like, just know them. You have to know them. You have to know like what metabolic process they're kind of associated with. And Dr. Trotz, who teaches most of that stuff, she provides students with tables, so you really don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to be like, oh my gosh, I'm never gonna learn about these things. She like kind of does the hard work for you. Know those tables like the back of your hand, and I think that will be really helpful come time for the exam. My third tip would be to whiteboard your pathways for biochem. Again, it's like biochem is one of those things, like it either makes sense and you feel great on it, or it doesn't make that much sense and you need to just practice. So I would whiteboard those pathways as much as you can, and I would discuss them with people. Discuss them with your study group. If you don't have a study group or a study buddy, make sure that you are going to office hours. They do a really good job at trying to explain those things as best as they can. So don't neglect the pathways. Please don't neglect the pathways. NB1. All right. If anyone who's watching this, like if any SGU students are watching this and they have any tips for NB1, I would love it if you could comment on this video, because NB1 is one of those modules that like yes, I did hate NB1. It was a really big struggle. I felt like I didn't know what was happening, but it's one of those modules that I'm just like, in the back of my head, I'm like, I want to do that again. Like, I want to prove to myself that I can do this. And I mean, I didn't do terribly on NB1, but it was a struggle. And is it worth it? Anyway, let me relax myself. All right, so NB1 is neuroanatomy. It's a lot of anatomy. So I tried to make flashcards for NB1, anatomy flashcards, and it was just so much. It was just too much. There was no way I was like, there was no way I was going to be able to stay on top of it. There was no way that I was going to like get through them every day, like in time for the exam. It was just like, it was. And a lot of like tracts and pathways neuroanatomy was tough. It's really hard for me to explain like what is going on in neuroanatomy. You have like, you learn a lot about lesions in your cortex. You learn about lesions in your brainstem. You learn about lesions peripherally. Like, there's just a lot happening. So, do what you can. And what you can do is your best. I know it is. I know it is. But tips, one of the biggest tips I got for NB1 was to watch either Boards and Beyond or Dr. Najib. I didn't do any of those because I just could not find the time. Seriously, I couldn't find the time. Like, I'm not making excuses. I'm not exaggerating. Like, trying to learn the volume of material we had to learn for NB1 and trying to like watch this man, Dr. Najib, like it just wasn't happening. So but if you can find the time, I would suggest it because people have said that helps a lot. So let's just move on to NB2 because so NB2 was an extension of neuroanatomy, but it was more manageable because we kind of got like, even though NB1 was a whirlwind, we had a good foundation from NB1 to build on to NB2. And then the other half of NB2, we started getting into the behavioral sciences and, just learning about and we were learning more about like terminology on the behavioral science side when it came to NB2. So it was a perfect mix and it was like a perfect balance of like the neuroanatomy and then just like the behavioral neuro stuff. So I liked NB2 as a module, and NB2 was actually when I shifted from doing like handwritten notes, because I remember how heavy the content of NB1 was. I was just like, I need to work smarter and not harder. So I started shifting from handmade notes to something else, which I will talk about in another video, so be on the lookout for that. And now's the perfect time. If you do not follow IMG's Connect, follow IMG's Connect on Instagram and on YouTube. I'm going to be using that platform with my friends, my two friends, Alasia and Noel, to share tips for IMGs, whether it be like school stuff or residency stuff. But yeah, I'll talk to you guys about the way I started to take my notes, which is really working for me in medical school. So, you know, if anything changes, I'm not afraid to shift. There are going to be modules that, you know, maybe that method that I'm using right now will not work, but I'll update you. So just follow IMG's Connect. Okay, let's take it back. For NB2, I would say don't stress about NB2. Just make sure that, like I said, you're working smarter, because you can start to feel burnt out at this point. There's just so much information, like, and NB1 also comes back. So NB1 is a big part of the NB2 exam, at least it was for my class, the August 2020 class. Finally, the NB3 module. The thing about the NB modules is they get better and better. Like, it starts off and you're just like, you want to cry every day. You think you're not going to get through medical school. And then you're like, oh, I can handle this. And then you're like, you know what? I just needed to take a deep breath. So, that was the case for me. NB3 was mostly behavioral sciences, and we learned a lot of different disorders, like anxiety disorders, personality disorders, eating disorders, we learned a lot of disorders, and we learned a lot of the different medications that you would use to treat these disorders. So the things about the disorders: people often underestimate how complex they can be, because any 2 or 3 or 4 disorders can sound exactly the same, but you have to pay attention to the amount of symptoms that you need to actually diagnose any one specific disorder. You need to know how long this has to be going on in order for you to diagnose it as one specific disorder. There are all these different categories. There are all these different criteria. So you have to be very focused in that way, in really looking at the test questions and understanding exactly, like, and I think that's the thing about NB3. You have to know exactly what's going on, because if you just have an idea, you probably won't pick the right disorder. Like, you have to know, like, the difference between PTSD and acute stress disorder can really it can really get people confused. So yeah, my tip for NB3 is to just be very detail oriented and do lots of practice questions. And what I love about SGU is that they provide a lot of practice questions, especially for the NB module. We had the whole, like, NB1, NB2, and NB3, they did provide a lot of practice questions. So you'll never be lacking in that. And they're really helpful, and they're kind of like a good measure of what the exam questions would be like. So yes, guys, overall, my tips, my favorite tip for people and being successful in medical school is to find a study buddy and find a study group and really discuss. There's nothing that, like, in this field and in this culture of medical school, like, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I believe in that statement so much. My study groups have been everything for me. My study buddies have really helped me get to where I am, and I've helped them get to where they are. So find a few. It's really helpful. If you are an SGU student, join a DES group. Me and my friend Daniel, we have a DES page called Overly Optimistic SGU Criers. And if you go to the announcements on that page, we have a Google Drive where we upload everything that's anything that we think is helpful. So we've been through it, and as we go, we're just uploading anything that we think is helpful. Even our notes, we're uploading practice questions. There's some textbooks on there. So yeah, follow our page. Follow IMG's Connect. There are also resources there that me, Noelle, and Alasia have for you guys. So yeah, if you need me, call me, no matter where you are, no matter how. Seriously, if you ever need anything, term 2 is real. Like, it just gets tougher. Like, term 1 is already tough, but term 2 just gets tougher. So if you need anything, let me know. Email me. Do what you gotta do. Thank you so much for watching. Please share this with your friends. If you know anyone who's starting at SGU, please comment and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye.